Patrick Whyte.
Patrick Whyte, Esquire, to be an officer of the most illustrious Order of Merit, OM, for services to sports.
Of course, we know him on ABS, commentating, of course, many appearances on Sports Action Line and, of course, talking sports on ABS television. Pat Whyte, commentator, and, of course, umpire, formerly director of sports. Pat Whyte.
One more brother of this life of cricket, he has passed away. One more disciple has left the yard, my people.
Overwhelming evidence shows that the deeds of Mr. Patrick Cleofoster Whyte were diverse, deep, and distinguished. For decades, Pat's purpose was to conscientiously commit himself to serving his nation and a variety of sporting disciplines beyond the call of duty. From an average medium pace in his childhood community of Villa, a passionate Patrick rose to the heights of regional umpire, sports presenter, commentator, manager, director of sports, and national honoree. One of his peers growing up was another outstanding product of the area, Gene Gould, a former Villa and Antiguan captain, as well as an ex-Leeward Islands cricketer.
He would always encourage you as a young player, maybe he saw the talent, I don't know, and he did really encourage me a lot.
Another clubmate of Pat Whyte was a youthful Dale Blinds Richards. Richards had knowledge of Whyte as a strict disciplinarian and a worthy inductee into the Villa Hall of Fame.
My shirt was a t-shirt because I forget the flannel. The t-shirt didn't have a collar. So Gould gave me the ball and he asked me, where you gonna bowl? Which ball you gonna bowl? Where you gonna bowl? I said, left arm over. He said, on which pitch? I said, here I'm gonna bowl. Tell me where your shirt? I said, I have on my shirt. He said, you have on collar? So I looking for the collar and I said, no. He said, you can't play. Gamble. In 2005, the Villa Club had a Hall of Fame, and Pat Whyte, Gene Gould, Mr. Pirro, Ephraim George, and Guff Gums was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and that was the first one.
Like Pat's peers, his son John saw a gentle, well-rounded, meticulous, and hard-working individual.
I remember him as a family man. Over the last few weeks since he's passed, I've been hearing all the different stories. I've gotten all the calls, all the messages with persons going back to the 1990s and 80s and 70s of all his exploits. But my memories of him are still Daddy, still the person that I looked at as my protector, my guide, and all the fun memories that we had together. So balancing the two for me has been sort of interesting when I juxtapose my side of seeing him being that diligent and disciplined and determined person at home and hearing persons from his professional life describe him the same way but in their professional field.
His teachings and guidance had a huge impact and influence on John's own family life and his professional career.
As far back as I can remember, I feel like he's always been preparing me for something else. Whether it was primary school preparing me for secondary school preparing me for university, and all along the way preparing me for life in general. So it's funny, I never appreciated, at the time, I always got the lectures and the discussions about how you should approach things, how you should approach life, what type of integrity and ethics you should have. And I thought, Daddy just going on and on about whatever things. And now that I am a grown man with my own family and my own career, I can see all the principles that he was constantly trying to impart on me. And he used to say it in his own comical way. He used to say, you'll understand. The pig always used to ask mommy why she mouth so long, but you'll see someday. And all the way through to, as he was getting older and sicker, he would always say, I'm getting close to departure lounge, but you have to carry on for your family. Here's what you need to think about. Here's what you need to consider. And that influence took place right throughout my life with him.
Naturally, as a sports fanatic, Mr. Whyte encouraged his son to participate in a sport or sports of his choice. It was also made clear the value of a sound education, especially in light of the possibility of career-ending injuries.
I played a little bit of basketball when I was younger, toyed with cricket until I realized I was afraid of hardballs, and then kind of settled on football. And he always encouraged me, whichever one I was doing, to make sure I trained when I was supposed to train, and to make sure that there was an academic discipline as well. You always used to say you can go out and be the best football in the world, but one broken leg and you're sitting on the bench for the next couple of years.
The late administrator's qualities of integrity and wholeheartedness have been expressed as well by Sybil Walling, past president of the Antigua and Barbuda Netball Association. Their relationship not only stemmed from netball, but also from Walling's active involvement as a judge during the National Sports Awards.
Pat Whyte was a real gentleman. He was a very particular person, and certainly it was good working with him. He portrayed what he thought ought to have been portrayed, and he also tried to help the various associations, as far as I know, our netball sport to be, and really tried to do the best he could and do everything in portraying the elements and the responsibilities of the players. And so we worked well together. He was reliable, very, very reliable. If he was involved in something, one could go to bed and sleep at night and be sure that if they woke up at 3 o'clock, he would have been working on it or nearly finished it. Pat was a special person, and I enjoyed working with him, and I respected his manner of being responsible for things which he never let down. And so it was a very good relationship among us, and we had a good team. Hence the results that they portrayed at that particular time.
Similar tributes have been echoed by former netballer and past coordinator of schools netball, Evan Williams-Willis. As a player and then a worker in the Ministry of Sports, Williams-Willis benefited from Whyte's astute leadership.
He had a gift and he had a love for the sport. We were really close in the activities of all sports, especially netball, and he helped a lot of people. Pat was a very dynamic person. He had a dynamic personality. Sometimes serious face, but underneath, he wants people to just prove themselves. You know, he sort of bring out the best in you. And that kind of personality is what is sometimes lacking in organization, head of organization, where that love must come out, and to motivate people and the activities that he would involve himself in.
Netball was one of the sports which caught the imagination of the late commentator.
In the 90s, one of the halcyon periods in Antigua and Barbuda's netball history, the distinguished voice of Pat Whyte was a regular feature.
And Antigua come away in the end, and that was really brilliant work. And whether they win or lose, I think there'll be some bright spots in this match that they'll remember, and they capitalize and the rising sun.
With an eye for detail, his voice gave a clear picture of the game for the radio listeners.
Nevertheless, Antigua won't stop to sympathize. Karen Joseph showing no mercy as she gives it to Silston, who finds Candace Jones under the ring, and she makes it 67. So the Antigua steamroll and not really pressing on and not really looking to get to 90 or 100.
His analysis of a player was impeccable.
Although we have been saying how Candace Jones is big, we don't want our listeners to think that she's big and awkward. She's certainly quite agile, and in fact towards the end of that second quarter she demonstrated a lot of prowess, as she's doing here again, pivoting, feinting and getting some one-handed passes into Karen Joseph under the basket, and she has been most effective with that.
The memory of Pat Whyte's descriptive use of language and his immeasurable contribution to sports in Antigua and Barbuda will live on.
The sporting icon's versatility encompassed umpiring, and he stood among the stalwarts, reaching the heights of being president of the West Indies Cricket Umpires Association. Initially, Clancy Mack was under his wings and later became an umpiring colleague. Mack learned firsthand from one who gave decisions and sound advice.
I must give him all the credit because he was the person instrumental in making sure that I qualified as a West Indian umpire. We used to do the training on the old Treasury Building on High Street, where sports and games used to be initially. So I followed Pat all along the way. When he was president of the Leeward Islands Cricket Umpires Association, I was the general secretary. When he left and went as area vice president of the West Indies Cricket Umpires Association, I then went to president of the Leeward Islands. Then he left from area vice president to the president of the West Indies Cricket Umpires Association, and I went as area vice president. He always used to say to me, while we were umpiring, because we did a number of matches together, and he would always say to me, look, make sure you do not err on the point of law. Opinion will always differ based on where you are and what angle you're looking from. But you must make sure that as far as the law is concerned, you're doing everything within the law to make sure that at the end of the day, you would be on the right side.
In the realm of umpiring, Pat's impact was widespread, and in order to fully appreciate his sterling contribution, the Antigua and Barbuda Umpires Association, headed by James Stevens, sought government's green light for an official funeral.
No umpire during his era, be it Antigua, Leewards, and West Indies, Pat is always sharing information. I can recall during the training session we had locally, you had James Stevens, you had Myron James, just to name a few, who came through his teaching. Right? And later on you had Aston Christopher, Alvin Knight, all along. And one thing he always made sure that at the end of every session, umpiring session, that whatever the question that might be asked, you're in a position to answer it. Because he said, there's no setting up to say, look, you go home and try to remember. You must know, because when you're on the field, whatever the situation arises, you must be able to deal with it.
Mark was also enthralled and excited by Pat Whyte's clever and fascinating use of language.
I can recall even in my earlier days playing football, I'd get home in the evening to listen to Pat Whyte giving a description of the day's play, the game. Right? And he said one time when Superstars beat Empire and we were sponsored by Kentucky, he said, well, the chicken has really come home to roost. Right? I mean, he had so much plain saying things, describing events. Right? It was a joy to sit and listen.
Another individual with a profound knowledge of Pat's eye for detail was retired cricketer and outstanding footballer Mervyn Richards. Richards served as assistant director of sports while Whyte was in charge.
He had to make sure that all the I's were dotted and all the T's were crossed. I can say for sure that I have modeled my administrative stint when I took over from him as the director of sports. And certainly if you follow exactly how Pat led, you won't find yourself in any sort of trouble.
Prior to their working relationship, as a footballer, Richards was exposed to his future boss's meticulous nature when he served as manager of the national team.
I remember we went to French Guiana, Cayenne, to play some games there. He was the manager, and he was so meticulous about the way how he did things that when he called each player to his room to collect their gears, everything was well folded, the shirt and the pant and the socks. And I might even go back to say that when we were traveling and we were at the airport, all we had to do was just to sign the immigration card. He already did that.
The younger brother of the illustrious Sir Vivian Richards added that they both saw values in Mr. Pat Whyte similar to those held by their dad. Sir Vivian himself would have benefited from the administrator's influence because he was part of the committee responsible for paving the way for Richards and Sir Andy Roberts to attend the Alf Grover Training School in England in the early 1970s. His influence extended as well to the initiation of the National Sports Awards, where many nationals were honoured, and then fittingly, Pat too was given his flowers.
he was dedicated and committed to honoring sportsmen and women and officials like himself and people who have done the things that he did. He saw to it that they should be honored, and this is how we came up with the National Sports Award, which is very much still going on today. And I thought that was something special. You know, it wasn't about self. He was just thinking about others, which prompted us in the ministry at that particular time after he had resigned and I became director of sports. Myself and my staff at that time, Heather and Joaki, Irvin and Shipwreck, we decided, look, I think now is the time that we should now honor the same man who was dedicated his life to honoring others. And so we gave him a lifetime achievement award.
His strict adherence to discipline is remembered as well by Neil Cochran, who also grew up in the Villa area.
When I think of him, I think of discipline. He was a disciplinarian, someone who didn't, a no-nonsense man, didn't take crap. And he's a man of standards. Always tried to operate at a high standard within the means that he had.
One of the areas Pat Whyte's leadership quality stood out was as a manager, and Cochrane was a beneficiary while being part of touring teams.
He always made sure that we were doing the right thing, and he would call us out if he didn't think we were doing good enough, because he saw his role as developing young men into men, you know, teenagers into men. And so I think he tried to instill in us the discipline and the knowledge that he had garnered through his lifetime and life experience.
More close contact with the outstanding administrator followed at the business level. It related to both men's involvement in the National Sports Awards.
When I started to work for Kennedy's Club Limited, as sales and marketing manager, one of the projects that I had to take over, because we took over from Antigua Brewery, and Antigua Brewery was sponsoring the National Sports Awards. And so as a result, when we took over the Kennedy's, the sole distribution for the brewery products, we had to take over the National Sports Awards, because that's one of the projects that they had, just like inter-school sports. So Pat and I worked even closer together to make the Sports Awards and take it to a different level. You know, as I was now the driving force, right, and kind of leading the discussion per se, whilst, you know, he was, yes, and, you know, bouncing the ideas how we could do it. So we would have met the National Sports Awards in a situation where it was being held down at the multipurpose center, and the people would get their awards, and then we move on from after the awards. You go to, you know, that's some snacks outside, and so, you know, personally, I thought that if you're going to celebrate greatness, your best athletes, we needed to do it at a much, much higher level. We needed to really let them feel special. We needed it to be a more dress-up vibe, you know, something that they, as you've done all this hard work and you're the best of your craft, when you step into that room, you're recognized and you appreciate the ambience. So we moved it from down at the multipurpose center and took it to Jolly Beach Resort. And that's when everything took off.
Cochrane added that Whyte worked tirelessly in molding young minds and uplifting the spirits of athletes across the Twin Island state. That commitment was glaring in 1998, when the Antigua Recreation Grounds was in need of upgrading to meet international standards for the hosting of a test match against England. As Director of Sports, he applied himself to the task day and night.
I was working with Everett Roberts at the time. He was in charge of doing certain work in the recreation ground. I was at Barbuda, stationed at Barbuda, and he called me over and told me, look, you have to come over. So he said, no, we have to get this thing finished. And every day, Jack, Pat in recreation ground. If you work until 4 o'clock in the morning, Pat in recreation ground. When the grass came in at Deepwater Harbour, Pat was down here.
His administrative duties dated back to the 1970s when he worked under the late sports minister, the Honorable Reuben Harris, and subsequently took over from Sir Reginald Samuel as Director of Sports. Then in 2009, the true statesman was deservedly bestowed with the Order of Merit for his immeasurable impact on national development in the area of sports. In his closing days, his son, John, was able to learn more about Pat Whyte, an administrator, manager, umpire, sports presenter, and commentator who shared himself with the rest of the society.
I got the opportunity in these last couple of months with him to say all the things that I wanted to say to my father, and he said all the things he had to say to me. So it's important for me to appreciate that Pat Whyte was my father. He belonged to me and my mother and my family, but he also belonged to the communities of Villa and Param and Antigua and the West Indies. And so I am grateful and feel lucky and blessed to have been able to spend 36 years of my life with him over these last couple of months. Like I said, it's been tough, but hearing all the stories and being able to see him and his legacy live on through the likes of Sir Viv and Sir Andy and all these different persons that have been calling me and sharing those stories gives me a certain amount of comfort and peace.
So a colossus in sports has departed, but memories of his assiduous work and service will live for a long, long time.